Namaste, Professor Alok Tripathi ji, today's distinguished speaker, Dr. Geetesh Nirban, co-convener of this Mahabharata webinar series, distinguished invitees, and dear friends who are interested in Mahabharata scholarship that have joined us. Though it is a repetition, I always feel like introducing the project is a very important, necessary step to begin the program. So that's all. Let me repeat for the sake of the speaker and also for the sake of the audience who join us newly. I welcome you all to this 35th session of this series of webinars on Mahabharata as hosted by Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi and Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi. These webinars are being organized under the aegis of the SPARK project, which is a scheme for promotion of academic and research collaboration, an initiative of Ministry of Education, Government of India. The title of the project is Yoga Consciousness in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, an ethical value for societal and political well-being. We are working as a team with Professor Vishwa Adluri from Hunter College, City University of New York as international principal investigator, and Dr. Joydeep Bagchi from Germany, who is presently associated with the University of Hindu University of America as co-investigator, and Dr. Geetesh Nirban from Department of Philosophy, Kamala Nehru College as the Indian co-investigator, and me, Professor Bala, as head of the Department of Philosophy as Indian principal investigator. We have an extended team which consists of Ms. Jayashree Jha, Ms. Anmol Preet Kaur, Ms. Megha Kapoor, who are the research scholars of the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, and also Ms. Deepshika, who is a postgraduate student of the department. And all these research scholars are interested in working on Mahabharata, and they have been working for their degrees, doctoral work, research on Mahabharata. As far as our project is concerned, it is our collaborative attempt to revisit the Indian epic to explore yoga consciousness as one of its underlying messages while understanding how dharma as a result of yoga consciousness in Mahabharata can well be interpreted for political and societal well-being. And in the process, we would like to build a new approach to yoga, and we are also attempting to reappropriate the texts of classical Hinduism, and we are planning to, or we have been looking at very important aspect of human life, whether it is societal well-being or political well-being or whatever it may be. The question that comes forward is what is the right course of action? So we would be deliberating on that as well. So our attempt is not just to explore various aspects of Mahabharata. Of course, that is the crucial aspect. But our intention is also to reach our diverse audience. So instigate people across disciplines and also general audience as well. Invite them to have a relook at Mahabharata tradition. So these series of webinars are our humble attempt to make the various aspects of Mahabharata reach diverse audience who hold interest in the study of the epic. We started this series of webinar during the extreme phase of lockdown to engage minds with Mahabharata. We have had the privilege of hosting scholars of repute from universities, organizations in India and abroad, wherein diverse topics related to Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita have been touched, ranging from social and political well-being, ethical dilemmas, justice, consciousness, karma yoga, instrumental violence, dialogical consciousness, place of curses and boons, and many more topics pertaining to the epic, all as an attempt to explore Mahabharata from the human well-being, for the human well-being. We are very honored to have with us today Professor Alok Tripathi ji, Additional Director General, Archaeological Survey of India, New Delhi. He will be speaking to us on archaeological investigations at Dwarka and Dwaravati of Mahabharata tradition. Following last week, we had a cinematographer coming forward and talk to us. So following a cinematographer, today we are going to listen to an accomplished archaeologist. So archaeology has a crucial role. No? Archaeology plays a crucial role in letting us know what we were. Okay, so we think that we know what we are now, but unless you know what we were sometime back, it is really difficult to understand and place ourselves in understanding what we are. So for that very particular purpose, archaeology plays a very important and significant role in understanding what we are, which means the present. If you want to have a clarity regarding the present, you are required to know your past as well. So, in that particular aspect, when we look at a historical consciousness, both tangible and intangible things play a crucial role in developing our historical consciousness. And in that particular aspect, with regard to the tangible things, the archaeological survey of India and archaeology as a discipline plays a crucial role. Let's listen to Professor Alok about two important places of Mahabharata, Dwaravati and Dwarka. So questions that get answered in the process, I believe, would be like some people do raise this question like Mahabharata, whether Mahabharata is a myth or a historical fact. So probably some very important and significant light would be thrown as an answer, one of the answers to such kind of questions as well during the course of the discussion that Professor Alok would be developing now. So without wasting much time, let me request Dr. Geetesh to introduce Professor Alok to all of us so that we can proceed further to listen to him about archaeological investigations at Dwarka and Dwaravati. Thank you. And I now request Dr. Geetesh to take the proceedings further by introducing formally Professor Alok Tripathi ji. Over to you, Dr. Geetesh.
Thank you, Professor Bala. Namaskar to all. We are very honored to have amongst us Professor Alok Tripathi on the Spark webinar series. Professor Tripathi is a distinguished archaeologist and pioneer underwater archaeologist in India with his long experience in fields of archaeology, heritage management, higher education and research. He's a renowned authority on history, archaeology, and heritage management. He has directed several archaeological excavations in different parts of the country, as well as in Indian Ocean. He founded the Underwater Archaeology Wing at the Archaeological Survey of India. Several underwater archaeological excavations conducted under his direction in the Arabian Sea as well as in the Bay of Bengal have earned international recognition. As the most experienced underwater archaeologist in the country, he has worked as a resource person in UNESCO Asia Pacific Field Schools for training underwater archaeologists from several countries. Professor Tripathi holds authority in museology, art history, heritage management, art and architecture, remote sensing, and laws. Widely traveled in several countries in Europe, Africa, and Asia, he is the only social scientist who's listed amongst the 10 brightest young scientists in the country. Since 2009, he has been a professor at Assam University, a central university, Silchar, and the director at Center for Archaeology and Museology. He's now engaged in critical analysis of policies for heritage management, archaeological researches, and understanding of Itihasa. Recently, he's joined as the additional director general at Archaeological Survey of India, New Delhi. We congratulate him for his new assignment. And as Professor Bala just mentioned, he's going to be presenting his work on archaeological investigations at Dwarka and Dwaravati of Mahabharata. We all look forward to hearing from him about Mahabharata from the perspectives of archaeology. I now request Professor Tripathi to take over.
Namaskar. And at the initial stage, I would like to thank Professor Bala Ganpati, Principal Investigator of this Spark project, Geetesh Nirbhan, and their team And all those who are interested in Mahabharata or different aspects of Mahabharata. There is no need of saying that Mahabharata and Ramayana are two very important epics. When we talk about Indian history, Indian culture, our tradition, or the society. As the Gitesh has recently said, that there are people, the Professor Bala has also mentioned, that there are three groups of people broadly. One, who believe that Mahabharata or Ramayana or these all our ancient literature, whatever is written is true, word to word, and they have very deep faith in that. There is another group which believes that all these ancient literature are nothing but myth. There is a third group in between. You can call them intellectuals, scholars, teachers who believe that these ancient literature contain useful information about the past traditions, about our history, and then they try to find out different aspects, different things which are hidden in that. And to find out how much we can find on ground and whether there are history or mythology or only a literature, historians and archaeologists have tried to research, and archaeologists are now trying to find the material evidence. Archaeology is the study, search, and analysis of material evidence. So this project is working on a very vital aspects of our tradition, but we archaeologists search the material evidence. And those evidence which are physical, which can be seen, which can be analyzed, or can be touched, you can do it or feel by everyone. So once you find the material evidence, then you can settle many things. And these efforts are going on for almost a century. And we carried out certain investigations underwater, because you must be knowing there is a tradition that Dwarika was submerged after the death of Krishna. So we, means when I say we, I'm talking about the underwater archaeology wing, which carried out investigations of Dwarika to search the remains of this city. Well, just let me, in a very brief, tell you about the history of archaeology, because in the very initial stage when British came, for them archaeology was the study and translation of ancient literature. And those who were doing it, they were considered as archaeology. Then they slightly moved from literature to inscriptions and coins, and then come to the documentation of the buildings and sculptures. And finally, they started field work and excavation, what is now considered as archaeology. So we are talking about search of material evidence, their study, and their interpretation. So in the very initial stage, it was Parjitar was the first person, while translating Markandeya Puran, he wrote about the Revatak Hill. Revatak Hill was the landmark close to which Dwarika was situated. And in that context, for the first time in 1902, he tries to locate Dwarika. And before we go on Dwarika and its history, let us also understand one thing about the significance of Dwarika, or how archaeologists can try to find out the historicity or the date. Even there is a large number of people who believe that Mahabharata did happen. But now the question is, when did it happen? Some say it's around 900, 800 BCE. Some believe around 1500 BCE. Some believe 3500. some believe 5,000, and some go beyond that. So there is no consensus, and everybody has got his own reasons. They have got their own evidence. Some on the basis of astrological calculations, some on the basis of literary or linguistic grounds, some on the basis of the material evidence. And in Mahabharata, a number of sites have been mentioned. We know, just to name a few: Mathura, Hastinapur, Koshambi, Ahichat, Dwarika. But among these all, Dwarika is the one which was established during that period, and it was destroyed soon after the death of Krishna. Therefore, it becomes very significant because Mathura was there and it is still there. So if you conduct any archaeological investigation there and find the evidence, it becomes difficult to say that which particular evidence belonged to Mahabharata period. There is no such Mahabharata period. I am using it for the sake of convenience. Or which are the evidence which are contemporary to that event. So it becomes difficult. But Dwarika is a place which was a city which was established by Krishna when he moved from Mathura to Dwarika. And soon after his death, this city was destroyed. So this city existed at the time when Mahabharata took place. So if we find that, and if we can date it, it will prove beyond doubt that yes, the events which are written in the epics are true. And the material what we find at this place can be dated scientifically. And whatever date comes, that would be the date of this great event. Therefore, Dwarika becomes very significant because it is the only place which is directly related with Krishna, who is the hero of the whole epic, and it is contemporary to this event. And therefore, it's a very significant site. There are many other. There have been investigations at Hastinapur. Professor B.V. Lal, who is a great authority in the archaeology, he has conducted excavation in 1950s. And there he found certain types of material that what we call painted gray ware, a gray pottery, which is having a black paintings on it. And then included that these are the pot which belongs to Mahabharata. And on other sites which are mentioned in Mahabharata, similar type of pottery was found. So on the basis of that, it was decided or concluded during that time that this pottery belongs to Mahabharata. But again, there were certain difference of opinions, and it was difficult to prove because all these sites are multicultural. But Dwarika is the one which has a different or distinct characteristic, so that once if you find it, then it can settle the issue. So therefore, it is important. And then in 1902, when Parjitar first mentioned about Revatak Hill, he also talked about the city and its location. So from where it starts, locating and Dwarika, the city which is mentioned in Mahabharata. It's not that Indians were believing there is a place, Dwarika, in Gujarat, and for the ages, Indians believed that that is the city where the Krishna ruled, and it was the capital of Krishna, and they had faith in that, and even today they go. It's a very sacred place for Hindus. So for them, there was no issue. But from research point of view, the Parjitar starts a debate. And then in 1925, A.S. Altekar writes about the ancient cities in Saurashtra. And there he writes about these cities, and based on the evidence and the remains there, he writes that this place is not as old as of 1200 BCE. That is the date what he was thinking. But based on other things, finally he concludes that, yeah, it is the place where Krishna had established a city. Around 2 decades later, A.D. Pusalkar wrote 2 detailed articles on Dwarika. And that was a point where he discussed many aspects of the city, evidence, literature, traditions. And on the basis of that, he concluded that this is the Dwarika, which is mentioned in Mahabharata, the Dwaravati of Mahabharata. And this is a place where the city was established. And since then, everybody believed firmly, everybody means I'm talking about the scholars, that this is the place where the city was established during Mahabharata period. So that was the first half of last century. It was more on the literature or historical researches. In the second half, archaeologists start taking interest and conducting excavation in the archaeology of epics, both Ramayana sites and Mahabharata sites, the historical places which are mentioned in these two epics. And there was a project on which number of sites were excavated by great scholars like Professor B.B. Lal and Professor Sankalia from Deccan College. Both of them were the most famous and well-known archaeologists in the field of archaeological survey of India and in the academics in the university. So they carried out number of excavations and they started or they attempted to find the material evidence to establish the historicity of these epics. And the first excavation was conducted in 1963 at Dwarika. And this was a small excavation in collaboration with the Deccan College and the Gujarat State Archaeology. Those who have been to Dwarika, they might be knowing about it, but those who have not gone, it's an old mound and very thickly populated. And it is located on the westernmost tip of Saurashtra. And it's a very famous religious place because it is one among 4 dham and also one among the 7 Mokshadaini Puris. And Dwarika is the only place which figures out in these two. That's the only place which is a dham also and among the Sapt Mokshadaini Puris. So it becomes very sacred for Hindus. And when Adi Shankara established a peeth there, then its religious importance increased multifold. And thereafter, many Vaishnava saints, they visited there. And then millions of pilgrims, they go there as a tirth. So it has a very, it's very important from religious point of view. Besides that, it has got a huge mound on which the settlement is there. So therefore, it also has the archaeological importance. And this mound is an old archaeological deposit. So from archaeological point of view, also it's an important. It was also an ancient port. So from maritime history point of view or from underwater archaeological point of view, also it has a great significance. And in the famous text of Periplus of Erythraean Sea, there is a mention of a port that is Barke, which is identified with Dwarika. So we know right from the early centuries of Common Era, it was known as a famous port on Gujarat coast. So it has got marine archaeological or maritime historical importance also. And traditionally, it is an important place. So when we try or think to locate Dwarika on the basis of information available in literature, there comes some difficulty because different ancient texts give different location. There is some variation. As Parjitar himself has mentioned that Dwarika was situated close to Revatak Hill, but near present Dwarika, there is no hill. It's a coastal area and nearby there is no hill. And Revatak Hill is that at Girnar. The Girnar Hill is known as the Revatak Hill, which is a little away from there. And that is land bound. And at the same time, some literature tells that city was submerged and it was on the coast where river Gomti meets the sea. So there is a little variation. So Adi Parv and Sabha Parv of Mahabharata gives its location near hill, whereas the Musal Parv and Harivansh mention that it was close to the sea. there are other Jain and Buddhist sources also which mention about Dwarika or Dwaravati. And there is a one source that is a Buddhist Jatak, Ghat Jatak, very comfortably dated to 3rd century BC. And it mentions that there was a hill on the one side of the city and there was a sea on the other side of the city. So it is one source which mentioned both. So on the basis of this, one has to find out where that Dwarika or Dwaravati, which is mentioned in Mahabharata, was located. So you have to get clue from there. Not only that, there are number of places in Gujarat and beyond which are known as Dwarika. So there is a Mool Dwarika, there is Panch Dwarika, there is Dwarika, there is Bet Dwarika, and similar names. And people there, they believe that it was Dwarika of Krishna. So that is another issue one has to investigate, that among these, which one should be considered as the original Dwarika or the real Dwarika. So in inscriptions also we find references, direct and indirect, about Dwarika or the Lord of Dwarika. So we get information from there. Of course, these inscriptions are comparatively of later date. So through various sources, we get information about this city. And based on that, one has to search where it is. And after the first excavation, which was done in 63, there was a very limited area available. Let me tell you about the excavation. When you start digging and if you find any structural remains, you don't remove it because you have to preserve all remains. And then by the times you go down, you hardly get any space to work. And when this excavation was conducted, the depth was around 11 meters. And by the time they reached at the bottom, they hardly had a space of 6 feet by 6 feet. So it was a sort of a shaft they dug. And the remains which they found could give only the date. And it was not possible to find remains of a city or remains of any house. But based on the material they could find, that the deposit which is there is around 2000 years, this deposit of 11 meters. Since the whole mound is thickly populated, it is difficult to have sufficient space for conducting excavation. So that is one of the handicaps for archaeologists to investigate. By chance, if you just dig a shaft and you land on something which is very significant, but such chances are very less. So they could get some date, but on the basis of that, Professor Sankalia concluded that the settlement should be somewhere nearby. And so that was the conclusion or findings of the first excavation. A few years later, around 2 decades later, when Archaeological Survey of India was demolishing some modern structure around this temple, the main temple which is there of around 15th century, and it is a protected monument of national importance. So there were certain settlements which were removed, and while removing these modern constructions, remains of an old temple was found. And by the side of this temple, and a small excavation was conducted. Again, a very limited, narrow excavation, where they found certain pottery, potsherds. And these potsherds appears to be quite old. They are known as the lustrous redware, but not much work was done on that. Prior to that, a pilot of Air Force, while flying on Saurashtra, had seen or noticed a certain submerged structure in sea. So light may be, sea may be calm, light was okay, good. So he could see some submerged structure. So it was reported in 60s. And in 1981, underwater archaeological investigation is started from Tamil Nadu coast, and from 1983, a project was started from National Institute of Oceanography, and they started working at Dwarika. And then they conducted investigations for around 20 years near Dwarika coast, and there they found certain remains, stone anchors, remains of buildings, stone blocks, etc. lying submerged close to Dwarika. So on the basis of that, it was claimed that there is a submerged city. But there was discussions and about the date of it and the nature of this structure, because they were all lying scattered on the bottom of the sea. And it was difficult because there was nothing which could be dated scientifically. They are stone blocks. So stone, if you date a stone, it will give you the date of the stone, not of the structure. So there was no scientific basis of ascertaining the date of this structure. And then in 2005, that underwater archaeology wing was asked to conduct a systematic investigation to study what all is there underwater or at Dwarika. So if we could find something there. And then the wing made a plan to conduct excavation on the land intertidal zone, the area which is exposed during low tide and then again covered with the sea water during the high tide. So that area which get exposed and also under the water. So Archaeological Survey of India, that wing was under the Archaeological Survey of India and the Indian Navy, both in collaboration, conducted underwater excavations there. So again, a very small excavation was conducted, but this area in the excavation, it was found that it is not that at present this area is thickly populated, but even in excavation, the remains which were exposed, they proved that the site was occupied one after the other for almost last 2000 years. And there was hardly any space available. So that proves one thing very clearly, that place was of some significance where people were continuously living. And one structure was destroyed or removed, and soon after that on the top of it, another structure was constructed. And several phases of construction could be noticed in a very limited area. And because of this construction, again, the area to go down becomes very restricted and limited. And then we could find a very small area where we could find certain evidence, and that were like the one which was conducted in 1963. And all these three sites where the excavation is conducted are located in a one particular area, very close to each other, whereas the mound is a huge, and it is away from the temple. And the temple is situated on the top of the mound, which is the highest point. And those who do archaeology, they know generally in a mound, the highest place or the center of the mound contains the earliest or the most significant structures or remains. But that is not possible because monument is there, so one cannot go down there. So one has to work in periphery. But again, for that also, you need a lot of other investigations to find more about the nature of the settlements during this ancient period. Then while working underwater, sorry. So since earlier work was also done, and then it was a very important sites, a very detailed systematic investigation was conducted. Indian Navy deployed one of the survey ship. It has got many survey ships which carry out survey in the Indian Ocean, and they are having all sorts of state-of-the-art equipments for surveying in any depth. So we very systematically, thoroughly surveyed an area of around 2 nautical mile by 1 nautical mile of Dwarika town, which is the present Dwarika in the state of Gujarat. And they are using multi-beam sonar, side scan sonar, echo sounder. These are all remote sensing tools which are used to study the bottom of the sea by sending the sound waves. So the all data was captured, real-time analysis was done, simultaneous diving was conducted, and the whole data was processed. On the basis of that, a very detailed bathymetric chart was prepared. And we also prepared 3-dimensional model of the bottom of the sea of this area to identify the most probable location where city could have been established. And we could trace a paleo channel of the river. And as it is mentioned in the ancient literature, that city was situated where river Gomti meets the sea. And there is a stream which is known as Gomti. And by the side of it, we explored that area because that was the most probable location. So we could see even the paleo channel in that our model and in bathymetric sheet. So based on that, then we carried out diving. The divers of archaeologists and naval divers, they explored the area. And then we saw certain areas are having a better concentration of remains. When you dive there, you don't see anything because whatever is exposed is covered under thick vegetation. But you can see there is in certain pockets, there is more vegetation. So there is a probability of getting more remains. So we narrowed down to our search area to around 200 meter by 200 meter. And then we properly lay out as we do in archaeology. We divided the area in the squares and then conducted systematic investigations. Somebody may even question that why we narrowed down this area. 2 nautical mile by 1 nautical mile is not a large area. Why we could not explore the whole thing? But you should know when you do diving, the maximum time one can spend underwater is 3 hours in a day. So one person can work maximum 3 hours. And then water being a different medium, your all activities get restricted. So it's not like you can walk on the earth. Even if you have 3 hours on the ground, you can walk along. But when you are diving underwater in 3 hours, you can do very limited work. So we have to consciously decide that we have to select the area. And then we selected an area of 200 meter by 200 meter. And that was thoroughly scientifically investigated. And then we found that a particular area in that has more potential. And finally, we decided 50 meter by 50 meter area for detailed investigation. And there, then divers had to go down, clean all the vegetation. And area close to Dwarika is a very high energy zone. You have a very strong current and very strong waves. So working there is a difficult task at times. So you have to see the particular time when you can work there. So even if you suppose clear anything and then by the time you come tomorrow, you will find everything is covered again because of the waves and current. Or sometimes the currents are so strong that staying there to work is a challenge because it is so thrust is so much that it becomes very difficult to stay at one place. So having these experienced divers and with our techniques, we could manage with that. So all the vegetation was cleared manually. Then there was a very thick incrustations on these remains that was cleared with the brushes and other mechanical devices. And then after that, it becomes clear that there are the structural remains. So there are huge slabs properly cut, cemented, having a uniform thickness. So undoubtedly, there are structural remains which are lying scattered off Dwarika coast. Now the question comes again, because they are scattered, they are broken, you don't have a complete structure. So what you have the parts. So now two question comes that what are these structures? And then what is the date? And where they were? Because when we conducted excavation, we found that they are not having the foundations. They are lying, these pieces or structures, they are lying on the bottom of the sea. So then again, a challenge comes that where they were originally, because of the waves and current, they have moved from their original location. So that was the one thing we found, that they are not in situ. And all of them were exposed. So they were not having contemporary deposits along with them. In excavation, when you excavate any structure, by the side you get other remains. And some of these remains can be dated, and what date you get, you can assign that date to the structure because both of them are contemporary. But that was not the case in Dwarika because all the structures are lying on the bottom and there is no contemporary deposits. And if anything is coming and going, we know by the strong current, it is moving. It's not stable, deposited in proper deposition. So there was another challenge which we faced. But despite all these, we very thoroughly and systematically documented all these remains, and they were properly measured, drawings were prepared, photographs were taken, and very systematically their location was marked. So where they are, it was properly documented. The question remains about the date. Then we also conducted excavation in intertidal zone. That is the area which is exposed for few hours. And again, you know, the archaeologists work very systematically. It is not clandestine digging, you just remove something and take it out. Because if you do that and the context is moved, then the object loses its value. So we tried methods to do systematic digging, but when you follow a system, by the time you go down, the water start coming in, and then it becomes difficult. But despite that, we use different methods. We could go down in one of that structure, and at the bottom we found a wooden course. That was something very interesting. That structure was constructed over a wooden course, and there we could find a wooden block. And this wood is very important because wood can be dated scientifically through carbon-14 dating methods. So we do not know how old it is. So if this wood is dated, we can get date of that particular structure at least, which was in intertidal zone. So that was a very significant discovery during that underwater excavation. And this dating is yet to be done. So there is one evidence which can give us some scientific date, which can give us certain indication about those kind of structure which are constructed at Dwarika. So that is one part, that is one of the finding, but the analysis is still remaining and has to be done. We also conducted excavation on land where we found different kind of pottery, different kind of, we found certain coins which are of historical period. There are a number of structures, and what all remains and sculptural fragments are found there, that makes very clear that soon after the Gupta period, the place had become a center of religious importance, because there are early images of Vishnu, and not only religious means because Vaishnava means the Vaishnav center, and there are early images, there are remains of temple constructions, so they are there. But being these excavations limited to a very particular area, the nature of the city or nature of the settlement is not known. So what is known is only the cultural deposit or a sequence in a particular part of a mound. So that is our limitation as an archaeologist. And you must know that archaeologists, they speak only on the basis of the material evidence which they excavate. So question of faith doesn't come here. One may believe anything, but what evidence speaks. So right now, what evidence are there? They are from a very particular part of the mound. Then we have got certain evidence from intertidal zone, which can give us scientific date. That is one possibility. And the underwater investigation, where there are submerged remains, they are structural remains, parts of the building, properly made stone blocks. They are cemented with lime mortar, and maximum we got 4 courses of these stone slabs. Otherwise, all were scattered. And as I have mentioned, that current and waves are very strong close to this. And then a number of stone anchors were found there by the National Institute of Oceanography, as well as when we investigated, we found a large number of stone anchors are found, and they are of variety of stone anchors. And they are from early historical period up to the medieval period. And some of these stone anchors have been analyzed, and their stone quality has suggested that some of them are of African variety, some of them are of Arabian variety. So that is an established fact that Dwarika was an active port right from the early centuries of Common Era, and it was having a very active maritime trade or contacts, connections on the other side of the what is you say the Western Indian Ocean countries. So that is one thing well established. It is also that there are certain underwater remains which are at Dwarika, and that there is every possibility of finding more remains, provided that we have a more systematic and a detailed excavation. Now, when the question comes about historicity or the date of Mahabharata, as I have mentioned earlier, there are different opinions based on different things. But again, we have to find certain concrete basis. And when, as an archaeologist, I say, for us, it has to be on the basis of the material evidence. And material evidence of that period have to be found. And the limitations of excavations, I have already explained that they are very limited at a particular area. And one should also understand that absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So, and the one of the good example which I can give in 2021, as we are completing 100 years of our Harappan civilization or Harappa Mohenjo-daro excavation, that the place was investigated, excavated by various scholars. The first Director General of Archaeological Survey of India, Alexander Cunningham, had visited the place in 1872-73. He conducted excavation there, and in his excavation, he could not find any remain of significance. And he found it's just one ancient site, and he couldn't find anything significant. But around 50 years later, when Dayaram Sahni went to the site in 1921, he conducted an excavation, and then he found the civilization, which is one of the oldest civilization of the world, and it changed the history of the world, not only of India. So it's always possible in archaeology that once you conduct one excavation, you may not go on a right place, you may not find the right evidence, but sometime later, somebody else on the same place may conduct an investigation and can unearth the remains, which can change the whole history. So the limited works done at Dwarika has so far established that the place is of historical significance. It has got a thick deposit. It's almost 11 meters, which has been excavated. There is more than that. So there is a deposit of almost 14-15 meter deposits on the site, which is a huge one. And the investigation which are done in a limited area, our investigation were limited to 1 nautical mile from the shore. So rest all the area is yet to be investigated. And the mound, which is a huge mound having a more deposit towards the center, it also awaits for digging, proper digging, excavation. And again, I would like to tell that Dwarika is a place. If we locate Dwarika, the main ancient settlement of that period, and can date it scientifically, we will be able to solve a big riddle of Mahabharata. It will be able to give us a concrete scientific date. And once it is established when this event took place, from there onwards, then we can, recalculate the history, or we can place event of Mahabharata in a historical context, which is, as you rightly said initially, Some believe is mythology, some believe is truth. So once if that is done, then we will be able to make means to remove this myth and make it history forever. So this is in a brief. I am sorry that because of technological problem, I had a presentation and I wanted to show you that what exactly is there underwater and in our trenches, what objects were found. But I had a very serious problem in this morning and I could not, still I'm not able to open my, run my laptop. So I'm extremely sorry that I'm not able to show you all these remains. I'm not able to take you down. I wanted to take you down in on the bottom of the Arabian Sea and show you. So this is what we done in brief. And still the searches are on, people are interested. And we have a hope that we will get more remains and that will help us in ascertaining the date of Mahabharata and establishing the antiquity of Dwarika. So with this, I'll stop. And if there are some question answers, I'll be happy to discuss with you.
Thank you, Professor Bala. Thank you, Professor Tripathi. Professor Tripathi's very interesting address brought to light how excavations in Dwarika have been done for years in spite of difficulties in the underwater excavations. The theoretical research on dating of Mahabharata that most of us grapple with rests all in all on the work and efforts of you archaeologists. I mean, we have to be waiting for all the results of yours to actually justify one day that yes, that's the date that we have now in our hands. We all look forward to reading the book that you referred to for a detailed understanding of excavations in Dwarika, and I would really like to request you to send through email the details of this book so that we can forward it to some of our participants who have been constantly writing, privately that we want to read more and more. I think your address has really inspired quite a lot of younger people here. We have one of our participants who's from the 12th standard who's so much interested in archaeology. I would really request, I don't know what's the name, whether that's him or her, to switch on the video at the end of the lecture. And if you want to ask something from Professor Tripathi, you should feel free, because it's very encouraging when we see such young people coming in to understand the epic through various mediums. Your presentation has been a real learning, even for me, and I'm sure for quite a lot of people who are with us today. So on behalf of the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi, Team Spark, participants, Professor Bala, I thank you, Professor Tripathi, for sparing time for us.